On the night of March 13th, 2019, a call to 911 from a modest home would mark the beginning of a crime or stupidity story unlike any other. The caller was young Jimmy Zhong, who claimed to have $400,000 in cash at home. That amount seems quite large, doesn't it? But soon, when you hear how much money Jimmy, the caller, actually had, this figure will seem very, very comical in your mind, because Jimmy had spent much more than this amount in bars in just one night. But that night, his call to the police about the $400,000 would go down in Bitcoin history. We don't know much about his family, but James Zhong, or Jimmy as he is better known, was born on May 24th, 1990. Zillion dollars, this call he made to the police would go down in Bitcoin history. We don't know much about his family, but James Zhong, better known as Jimmy, was born on May 24th, 1990, in the state of Georgia, United States. Despite coming from a middle-class family, he had a very difficult childhood because he was subjected to a lot of bullying at the schools he attended. He had become a very shy, lonely, and insecure child due to his weight, race, or some form of bullying. As the years passed by in this gray way, he found solace in shutting himself away at home, where he felt comfortable with computers and programming. Thus, by the time he turned 18 in 2008, he had managed to combine what he did best with academic education and had won admission to the University of Georgia to study computer science. Although he had achieved this, the child who suffered from the neglect and bullying of divorced Chinese immigrant parents, undiagnosed obesity, and what experts considered a highly probable autism spectrum disorder and alcohol dependency, would not have an easy time in college. However, technology and the internet would become his entire life during his university years. So around 2008 to 2009, he discovered something called Bitcoin. Of course, this discovery wasn't about making an investment. After all, Bitcoin wasn't yet an investment vehicle at the time. Jimmy had discovered the actual construction phase of something called Bitcoin. In other words, during those days, he was reading forum posts by Satoshi, the person who invented Bitcoin. He also seemed aware of the potential here, as he had decided to specialize in mining something called Bitcoin. Mining is a bit complex and would take a while to explain, but basically, he was using his computer to earn this digital currency called Bitcoin. He could then sell these in the digital realm for dollars, and even though Bitcoin was worthless at the time, it was used for purchases and such. Since the coin was so worthless, he had accumulated a lot of Bitcoin through this mining work on his crappy computer. As I said, it wasn't worth much money, but in 2011, the value of Bitcoin skyrocketed old computer at home. So as I said, it didn't amount to much money, but when Bitcoin's value started skyrocketing in 2011, he realized he had been in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing. The virtual world was much more appealing to Jimmy than the real world. Naturally, as he saw that he could develop himself more quickly here and create wonders with his keyboard and mouse, he became even more daring. As things stood, he had now crossed the legitimate boundaries of the internet and taken steps into the dark web, to Silk Road, the dark virtual world that not everyone could access. Silk Road, where Jimmy procured his personal banned substances, was an e-commerce site operating on the dark web, a dark virtual world inaccessible to most. In short, it was like the sites we use every day, but the goods sold there were horrific. So horrific I can't even describe them. It was founded in 2011 by Ross Ulbricht, who used the alias Dread Pirate Roberts, and started with illegal substances before quickly becoming a marketplace for everything from counterfeit documents to the sale of body parts or organs. Transactions were anonymous, and the only currency used on Silk Road was Bitcoin, a new digital currency. So the coins mined by our Jimmy mined. This made users' online activities practically untraceable. Silk Road users deposited Bitcoin into their accounts, and that Bitcoin was pooled together with other Bitcoins in the digital environment to prevent tracing its source. While it seemed a bit complicated and impossible to track, this process was far from perfect. But Jimmy was making money one way or another from mining and used his Bitcoin earnings to make numerous purchases here. His solitary nature pushed him to explore different avenues. Consequently, He placed orders for various banned substances and experimented with them like a social experiment. However, this site he was addicted to would soon take him to very different places. In 2012, while using Silk Road for the purpose I mentioned, Jimmy discovered a major flaw in the platform's withdrawal system. When he wanted to withdraw part of the balance he had deposited on the site back to his own Bitcoin account, he accidentally pressed the withdrawal button twice. Of course, he didn't realize what had happened at the time, but when he checked his balance, he saw that approximately twice the amount he had wanted to withdraw from the site had been deposited into his account. So, there was a glitch in the mixing process I mentioned, and when he quickly clicked twice, the money came twice. Then he tried the same thing again, and the quick click started, and the error worked again. For example, he deposited 50 BTC on the site and asked to withdraw 50 BTC again, and 100 BTC came to his account. Jimmy was shocked by this situation. He couldn't tell anyone about the flaw, and as long as it wasn't fixed, he could continuously earn unlimited profits. Since it was illegal, no one could report him for the theft he committed on this site. In 2012, when he was just 22 years old, he immediately started working on it after discovering it. He had created approximately 9 different accounts and had deposited small amounts of Bitcoin into each of them. He then exploited a vulnerability in the system to double each amount repeatedly. Over a period of 2 to 3 years, he stole a total of 40,000 Bitcoin through 140 different transactions, essentially siphoning off Silk Road. One of his accomplices also came into play here, anonymously mentioning his Mercedes-Benz 300S, which was a dream at the time on one of the first Bitcoin forums of the era. Our Jimmy was going to have that dream car at his doorstep one day. However, someone saw his posts on this forum, and that person was none other than the owner of the illegal site he had hacked, Silk Road. Jimmy had far more than most investment companies today, excluding the 40,000 Bitcoin he earned through mining. At today's value, this money amounts to approximately $4,095,120,000, but back then it was worth $500,000 to $600,000. However, those dollars were sums so large that Jimmy couldn't even imagine them in his wildest dreams. But when he saw the message from the owner of Silk Road on his computer that day, his brain seemed to freeze. Contrary to expectations, however, the message contained no threats, curses, or insults. The site owner simply asked Jimmy how he did it. Faced with this situation, our guy must have felt relieved because he calmly explained what happened, how he found the loophole in the system with spam clicks. The person on the other end simply thanked him and asked for Jimmy and sent him another 10,000 Bitcoins. Jimmy, who never left his house, whom no one talked to, whom girls weren't interested in, who didn't even have any friends, who was addicted and an alcoholic, was now a millionaire. Of course, by the time he did all this, the year had ended, and it was 2013. Of course, he had no idea that within a few months, Bitcoin's rise would cause his money to increase tenfold first, and then 100-fold in the following months. He stored the 50,000 Bitcoin he had mined himself and received from the site owner and stored them on his crappy computer at the time. When Bitcoin's rise caused the coins he legally mined to increase in value, he no longer needed them, so he took the parts out of the computer and stored them away. These details would come out later in the video. Anyway, the rise continued. By the end of 2013, the thousands of Bitcoin he had in his possession were worth millions of dollars. Jimmy's golden age had officially begun. It was party time. Jimmy wouldn't hesitate to spend his money, which had multiplied 100-fold in a year, in every conceivable way. Of course, around this time, the Silk Road website had come under the FBI's radar, and after extensive investigations, its owner was arrested and sentenced to life in prison without parole. The site and its data were also being investigated. In recent times, he had started renting private jets and driving his friends around in luxury cars, but he hadn't neglected to park the Mercedes he had mentioned on that forum in front of his modest home. The area was now crowded with people. To show off his wealth, he spent millions of dollars on cars, clothes, watches, private parties, yachts, and drugs. When the money ran out, He would order hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of drinks for the entire venue to make friends, and paid everyone's bills. For example, at a friend gathering, he even gave everyone he invited USB drives containing 50 bitcoins each as gifts. His money never seemed to decrease. Even if he spent millions of dollars a week ago, that money, excluding the massive bitcoins he kept hidden. Imagine, each of the USB drives he gave as gifts to his friends was worth $5 million today, but he didn't care about that at all. It was enough for them to just be around him, to hang out with him. He had transformed from a shy man who was laughed at into someone everyone wanted to be friends with. He had even bought himself a modest house. That was the house I was talking about. Compared to what could have been, this was nothing, but he didn't seem to want to draw too much attention to himself. Although his attitude wasn't really like that. When someone asked him what he did for a living, he said he did Bitcoin mining at the right time and that he earned all his money from it, which wasn't wrong. He was still spending the money he earned from mining, but no one knew about the billion-dollar computer he was hiding. This young man, who had never held a job in his life and had never worked with his hands, was playing with money he had never seen before. He was so sober that he could pick up girls at the bar and give them 30,000 worth of a white, banned substance that looked like flour and offered to give it to them without expecting anything in return. But he did this without knowing that the man standing behind the girls was a police officer. After this incident, he was arrested and later released on probation. But that was it. For years, he lived as he pleased, paying taxes on the Bitcoin he sold and living carefree. But this comfort would last only until the day he called the police because $400,000 had been stolen, and another of the most interesting events of the crypto era would come to light. $1,000. And another of the most intriguing events of the crypto era would come to light. I don't know why someone who squandered more than $1 billion in a single night would call the police for this amount, but in the end, it happened, and the police came. House, and over the following days, the police found nothing related to the incident. He was sure that the perpetrator was someone he knew, as the bag full of stolen money was hidden in the ventilation shaft. But when the police found nothing, he took a chance and hired a private detective. It was pointless, but I guess he was fixated on the person who stole the money rather than the amount. He asked Robin Martinelli, a private detective. He had asked him for all the details. He wanted to know everything about what he did, the source of his money, his surroundings, his friends, everything. After gathering this information, he started working, but despite scanning his entire internet history, following his friends street by street, and installing tracking devices in their cars, he couldn't find anything. Still, he realized that the people around Jimmy were bloodsuckers. But he couldn't find anything, and his investigations continued. Meanwhile, the U.S. had officially launched an investigation into this man following a report about $400,000 being stolen from Jimmy's home in March 2019. They didn't seem likely to find much until, unbeknownst to him, these investigations were underway. By then, he no longer felt safe and had purchased $1 million lake house for himself. So, right in the middle of the investigation, while the Revenue Service was trying to figure out where this guy's stolen $400,000 came from, he went and spent millions of dollars. Naturally, the authorities suspected there was definitely something else going on. Jimmy, the criminal investigator responsible for cybercrime and digital assets, had been assigned to track his financial activities. A court order was obtained to analyze our guy's internet activities, and with the research conducted and time passing, all the data on the internet, the transactions on a cryptocurrency exchange, in short, everything he did seemed to be traceable. I say seemed to be traceable because, as I mentioned earlier, these transactions were not easy to track. But after this discovery, the Revenue Administration only hired a company that specializes in tracking these blockchain systems. This company would slowly examine the person's actions and gather information through investigations that sometimes took weeks, sometimes months, sometimes years. After a month had passed, an official from the tax office, an official from this research company, and 3 men went to Jimmy's lake house, asked him some questions, and tried to assess the situation by filming him with a hidden camera. Of course, our innocent guy thought they were working to find his $400,000. But these guys were there because they believed the source of his money was solely the correct Bitcoin moves he had made in the past. $1,000. But the men's concern was that this guy, who lived alone in a big house and said the source of his money was only the correct Bitcoin moves he had made in the past, was secretly showing them the money he had on the exchange where he entered his password while they were there. According to the officers, these figures amounted to about $76 million. But the officers still had no idea about the real big treasure in that house during the time that had passed. And the investigations had reached the year 2020, when Jimmy's specially formed research team discovered a loophole. Jimmy had accidentally transferred $800 of simple money to a legal exchange account by mistake. And the account used for the transfer was now in the hands of that research team. After a year-long investigation, the team traced Jimmy's connection to Silk Road, the money he withdrew from there, and even his sales. They managed to find all his wallet codes and transactions. The only thing left to do was to issue a search warrant for that task. On November 9, 2021, a large team raided Jimmy's home, and he was still unaware of what was happening. With the help of dogs trained to detect electronic devices, the police found a safe buried in concrete under the floorboards in the basement, containing $700. Additionally, although it was unclear what it had to do with anything, an Alev gun was also found in the house. But the real bombshell wasn't hidden in a very secret place. It was in a box in the bathroom. Jimmy had stored exactly 50,000 Bitcoin in a computer inside a popcorn box wrapped in a towel. He could have been called a computer geek or many other titles, but he chose to put billions of dollars there. Jimmy had completely fallen for it. While agents were examining the evidence, they discovered that Jimmy had been part of a small group of pioneering coders working to develop and perfect the technology between 2008 to 2009. Agents discovered that our Jimmy was among a small group of pioneering coders working to develop and perfect the technology. But after that, none of that mattered anymore. James Zhong was arrested, and the 50,000 plus Bitcoin in the box was still encrypted, and Jimmy was keeping the password in his memory, refusing to tell the authorities. But this refusal could only last up to 6 months. His lawyers fought on his behalf, saying he hadn't spent the money. They argued that technically he had stolen the money from a criminal, and returning it would also be a crime. They weren't entirely wrong. Given the circumstances, Jimmy had to reveal the password. In March 2022, after the US government learned the password, it managed to transfer Bitcoin worth approximately $2.5 billion at the time, or $4 billion at today's exchange rate, to its own account. Jimmy, however, was sentenced to only 1 year and 1 day in prison in July 2023 due to his good behavior and not spending the money. Of course, all his assets, money, and property were also seized. Yes, the story of our autistic billionaire's billion-dollar heist, woven with parties, jets, money, expensive gifts, opportunistic friends, and a box of Cheetos, unfolded like this. Jimmy was released from prison in 2024 after serving a year, but according to reports, he is now broke, working as a driver for services like Uber Taxi. And if he didn't hide a USB drive somewhere or have an undiscovered stock account, which is highly unlikely anyway, he seems set to continue with his first job in life, driving for Uber. Just one mistake can bring someone down from the heavens to the depths of the earth. So was his mistake transferring those millions of dollars from Silk Road to his account, even though he had millions of dollars in potential? Or was it his own request for $400,000 that led to this whole investigation? $0, which led to this entire investigation. You can write your thoughts in the comments. Meanwhile, no matter how much it's investigated, the person who broke the window and stole the $400,000 still hasn't been found. That's another detail.